Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcia Gordon. I'm President and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the sixth webinar in the Business Council of Westchester's Anti-Racism Educational Series. To view any of the last sessions, and they've all been fabulous, you can view the videos on the BCW's website, which is www.thebcw.org in the Anti-Racism Resource Center. We have received increasingly positive feedback on the content, so be sure to watch them and also to share them with your colleagues. The Business Council of Westchester is committed to standing against racism and to create a call to action for all of our members to make a difference in the communities that we all represent. And I'm so pleased that with the partnership of so many other great organizations that I have to turn off that phone, that regular phone. That with the partnership of so many organizations that we have representatives from organizations from all over New York State. We will continue to seek opportunities for the BCW to play a critical role in advancing the conversation about dismantling racism, and most important, in taking actionable steps to support real change. As many of you know, we recently announced our first steps in our multifaceted program that includes listening, actions, resources, programming, and more. And we are so pleased to have so many other strong voices in our community to join us in partnership today to continue with the sixth in this series of educational sessions, with today's focus on self-care in the face of trauma. Thank you to our presenting partner, Balancing Life's Issues. If we could just advance a slide. To the Business Council of New York State, our event partner, to the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, to the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, to the New York State Economic Development Council, and the Putnam County Business Council, and the Westchester Putnam Workforce Development Board. It is my pleasure to introduce now Dr. Mel Campbell, who's a motivational, and boy is he motivational, psychologist, trainer, and speaker. Dr. Mel has a time-tested and proven record of helping individuals make a transformation in their lives, and he wants to do the same for your entire organization. For the last 17 years, Dr. Mel has taught and spoke in over 323 cities throughout 6 countries. He has given close to 1,100 presentations. And listen to this, he's motivated over 47,500 students. Dr. Mel has reached hundreds of thousands of individuals over radio and the news. Dr. Mel's education includes an MBA from Northwood University, a Bachelor of Science from the University of Tennessee, and a doctorate in psychology, where he maintained a 3.9 GPA. You're pretty smart, Dr. Mel.
Thank you.
He's a certified executive coach. I can't wait to hear his thoughts today, and thank you so much for sharing them with us. I turn this over to Dr. Mel Campbell. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Mel Campbell. I'm looking forward to talking to you today about self-care in the face of adversity. We have been through so much in this day and age. Not only are we dealing with COVID, a huge pandemic, a lot of racial issues. So you have to think to yourself, how are you taking care of yourself during this adversity? Now, we have a chat feature available, so I want as much participation we've had as previous webinars, and ask me questions, tell me some feedback, so on and so forth. We are making progress towards making sure that racism doesn't win. So let's talk about what we're going to go over today. When you think about the breakdown of self-care and the different type of things that could happen when you're experiencing trauma. We will talk about the history of trauma, racism, and the impact of trauma on your life and the lives of others. Psychological safety is so important, and doing the work of self-care is so important. As a psychologist, I have people all the time coming to my office and my seminars, always asking, how can I take care of myself better? We're going to share some techniques and tools with you. And then how to make sure you recover from the trauma. It does require resilience, and we'll talk about what a resilient person is. So if you want to test your chat skills out real quick and tell me what is it that you want to learn about today in the webinar, that would be very helpful as I do my presentation. Now, there is a concept called intergenerational historic trauma. This is a completely new term to a lot of people who have been through a lot of trauma situations in terms of race. The concept is this: over time, we in our generations, such as my mother, my father, have passed down some of the trauma that they experienced in their childhood. For example, my father was in the military, 1960s. Him and his platoon went in. He was the only black man in an all-white bus, and they went into a restaurant, and the restaurant owner said, "We don't serve your kind here." The entire platoon walked out right away, zero hesitation. And it's interesting how some countries, as well as military, don't have as many trauma racial issues. They get along because they know their mission, they know their duty. So these lessons have been passed down from generation to generation to teach us to be safe. My father talked to me about what to do when you're pulled over. You know, a lot of black men do that to their children. So I want you to think about, this is our first question, I want you to start writing things down and learning as much as possible. What kind of historic trauma have you experienced in your life that your parents may perhaps pass down to you? It's been throughout the generations. My grandmother, for example, actually picked cotton at one period of time, and the tragedies that she's went through, and being a black woman in that time has been really difficult. And I do want to say that a lot of people try to figure out what I am. You know, it's really powerful to do a DNA test, and I am 47% Caucasian, and then, or European actually, and then 51% African American and 2% Arabic. What was interesting is that when I said that to a girl I was dating, she goes, "I don't like Arabics." And I got offended. That was interesting how that happened to me, that trauma. Like, I didn't ask to be born the way I was. So we're looking now at chat, and one of you are stating that self-care is something you definitely want to learn. One of you is wanting how to support employees without being intrusive. We will talk about concrete steps that you can do with your employees in terms of dealing with their trauma at work. You never know what people are dealing with in terms of your employees or what their coworkers are dealing with, so on and so forth. And one of the biggest things with trauma is communication. We're going to talk about PTSD and how having a support group is so important. What about the concept of your work itself being a support group for you and the things that you're dealing with? Everybody getting together and talking about real issues rather than avoiding things, because the impact on trauma does affect our workplace. The impact of racial injustice infects our workplace. And of course, environmental trauma. Now, environmental trauma itself right now is going on. COVID is environmental trauma. Now, I like to use the concept, we've already talked about PTSD, PTS, post-traumatic stress. You had an event happen, COVID, and then that is impacting you on a day-to-day basis. So when you start going back to work, it is important that you support the trauma that your employees are dealing with as a result of COVID. And as a matter of fact, if you do the work now to support them, it's much easier when we start getting back to work. Some of you are already back to work. So let me ask you this, on a scale of 1 to 10, I like to do this with all my attendees. I want everybody to get in and chat and answer the best you can. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at dealing with trauma or adversity? When you have a situation where a trauma situation has happened on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, what would you rank yourself in terms of your ability to deal with certain trauma? Okay, so one of you is saying 7 and 8. One of you states deal with it well in the immediate term, later on to suffer the consequences. Okay, good. Great job in chat. One of you says, I think I deal with trauma as an 8 out of 10. So as a psychologist, I will ask you this question. What do you need to do in order to get to a 10? I know some of you don't give 10s no matter what. At the same time, if you're at a 7, what can you do to get to 8? So talk to me a little bit about that. What is it that you think you can do in order to improve your trauma skills as well as your adversity skills? So go ahead and write that in chat as well. We're having a critical conversation here, and I've loved the work that we're doing on this webinar. I want you to spread the message to everybody you know. Many people need to hear this message. Think about if we had calls like this webinar all over the country, and everybody was doing this on a daily basis. It's about real change. So some of you are saying that you meditate to deal with your trauma. You do therapy. One has no idea. Would love to know what to do. I'll be glad to do that. Having a sense of purpose, one of you states. Finding ways to process with people who are not who are empathetic. Good. I don't want to solve in the individual's issue. I want to be more of a sounding board and how to best to get them to answer the question themselves, and making an exercise to breathe. One of you says, stepping out of your pain to be able to see other sides of the situation and then exercise. So we have so many things going on in our life. If we don't, what happens if we don't take care of ourselves during this time? If you think about the opposite of what not taking care of yourself looks like, that can be pretty scary. So when you're dealing with your employees, when you're dealing with your work, think about not sleeping. Think about not eating correctly. Thinking about processing negative thoughts in an incorrect way. So we have to do the work in order to do the self-care to make sure that we're dealing with the things that we have in our life. Now, the intergenerational trauma that has occurred, intergenerational trauma and historic trauma that's happened over the years has weighed on us. And one of the ways that you can do the work is to talk to your friends about it, your family about it. You will be surprised at how many strong, powerful stories happen when you really listen to some of people's journey. And when you think about intergenerational historic trauma, there are events that have caused this to a certain group of people. We can use Blacks, we can use Hispanics, whatever the culture is, there was something done to them. And one particular example, everyone, is the American Indian. So when we go back to the founding of when people first settled this country, the trauma that was happened from the Indian population, American Indian population, that were taken from their homes, their lands were taken, and it's carried over into now. We find that American Indians have a high alcoholism rate, depression rates very high. When things have happened to their people, it's been really dramatic to see how it's affected their entire environment and entire way of life. Now, one of the biggest tips on this slide is that if you have had trauma in your culture, it is important that you rediscover your culture, the strength of the American Indian and the spiritual nature they have, connecting if you're African American with Africa and the king model of being born of kings and queens. That really helps in terms of dealing with trauma. In chat here, one of you saying, I'm a musician, playing music, engaging in whatever artist activity is your favorite, is always good for reducing stress. So you're reducing stress that way, talking to a therapist. And one of you says here, taking care of ourselves and our employees causes everyone, not taking care of our employees causes everyone to shut down and become isolated. So as an employer, if you have the mindset, I'm going to take care of my employees, they take care of you. So epigenetic means, as you see on the slide, that our cell structures, this is a fascinating research, our actual cell structure changes over time. And we can take the history drama of our people in our cells. Now, what is the reverse of this? What if we can change that mindset? Instead of having trauma, having positive genes that we pass on? I have a daughter, her name is Willow. She's 3 years old, and she's biracial. She has multiple races. I want to make sure that she knows that she's okay no matter who she is, that what happened to her people, she can learn from. So one of you mentions here in chat, you read the research on epigenetics, and it's demonstrated genetic changes due to trauma are passed on from parents to children. You just saw this post. Excellent. You know, I think you learn information at the right time in the right way, and we have to learn from our trauma, and we have to grow from our trauma. One of you says here, Carol Garofalo Jr., community relations specialist. Actually, I'm not sure exactly what that reference is. One of you says, I'm working to get people of African descent back to their continent to change the past 500 years of colonialism. So think about that concept. I am born in many different countries in Africa, and I want to go to each of those countries. That's one of the goals I have in my life. And we find the people that go back to their original country of origin of what their genes are, tend to learn so much about their culture that gets the trauma up to the surface and deals with it. Trauma that has been passed down has to be dealt with. And I'm telling you, as a psychologist, your health is so important in dealing with this trauma. So let's talk about some of the definitions of racial injustice. We know right now that there are incidents that are happening all the time in the news about prejudice. Prejudice, by the way, is prejudging someone. Have you ever had that situation where you prejudge someone and you were completely wrong? When I talk to people and I'm on the phone with people, people are shocked when they see me face to face because they say my voice doesn't match who I am. That could be stereotyping me on something and bias and how it affects our life. So I wanted you to put it in chat right now. Tell me one area that you would love to work on in terms of these 5 areas. Is it discrimination? Is it racial profiling, stereotype, bias, prejudice? Anything in your workplace that you think needs to be dealt with at a higher level? So go ahead and write that in chat. It's very important that we do the work and not just do the talk. We find that those that are about action on this particular issue tend to do well rather than just sitting back. Because when you sit back, that is a decision itself. One of you said all of them. And that's great to work on all of them. At the same time, when you focus on one, whatever you feed in life grows. So if you want to feed being more positive about other cultures, that grows. Those that are not educated about other cultures tend to have some sort of discrimination about a particular group, or they'll stereotype them. One of you stated, can you define the terms? So when you discriminate against something, again, you're not allowing something to happen. Racial profiling, we saw that a lot in what happened in terms of New York City, the stop and frisk law, where they were judging based on whatever psychological profile they believed a person had based on race. So they were making a lot of incorrect arrests, making judgments about it. Stereotyping is kind of putting someone into a box. All females do this, all males do this, all blacks do this, so on and so forth, and bias. One can have a bias against something like you may be a Coke person and I may be a Pepsi person. You may be a McDonald's person, I may be a Wendy's person. You have a certain bias, a certain way of thinking towards something. And then, of course, prejudice. Now, growing up, hearing the words KKK sends chills through me. Talking about KKK sends chills through me. I have been in a situation where I was the first African-American to integrate the white fraternities at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And when I see trucks in a parking lot, that could be a certain bias or stereotyping. I need not be here because I could risk my life. So those are some of the definitions in terms of racial injustice. Now, over time, you will experience environmental trauma. And we want to have this topic conversation about the definitions of these types of traumas so we can know how to deal with them. One of you says, how many functions of this topic throughout the year make people feel that it's a new culture, not just Black History Month? Very good point. So when you have celebrations like a Black History Month and everybody is focusing on every day thinking about an aspect of Black history that's been significant to them. And I really want to get towards the end of this webinar towards Martin Luther King's dream of everybody getting along, how the change was there because we had a belief in something, a nonviolent way in order to make true change. When you're dealing with employees at work that are dealing with environmental trauma and they're dealing with intergenerational trauma, that affects the work. And if we as employers don't deal with some of the trauma that exists in our workplace, it's going to come back up. So on chat, it states, my parents were raised in Mississippi, so you can guess how some of this appears to me. So no matter where you're from, we always have versions of what we think it's like. And I've been to every state in this country except for one, Alaska, and I've been really impressed with how beautiful this country is, how amazing people are, no matter where they're from. So I think it is about making sure we spend time with those cultures and those races that we're uncomfortable with. That is one of the true ways that we can deal with the trauma that we can experience by being afraid of another culture. You'll be surprised at how wonderful people are, because people are people, and they didn't choose, for example, the type of race they were in. I saw this movie, and I want you to recommend some resources that others can learn about trauma. Like, what trauma movies have you seen, and what kind of books have you read to help people with trauma? I want you to put that in chat. So when I was, I forgot that last point. I was just going to say, I'm going to continue. Let's try and focus on bringing this workplace to a higher level in terms of trauma. When we have man-made and natural disasters such as COVID, such as 9/11, the trauma of 9/11 still affects us. When people have that, when they hear that date or on that date, they still sense that mourning. So when you're in the workplace and you're experiencing trauma at work, you didn't have a good night's sleep because you were thinking about all the things that are happening in your life as a result of COVID. When you think about the things that you've done in a given day to get rid of your trauma in terms of meditation and exercise, you really have to focus on what can you do to expand your resilience in terms of trauma. So let's talk about some of the types of impacts that happen with trauma. And feel free to write in chat, again, any resources that you know in terms of helping with trauma. I'll recommend some things at the end. Any movies that you've learned a lot about trauma. Now, when we use the term acute stress, acute stress is ongoing. It's always happening. And I want you to think about this back in the caveman days, if you will. When a saber-toothed tiger or a dinosaur was going to attack us, we would experience fight, flight, or freeze, which I'm going to talk about later. So when the stress keeps happening, such as a COVID, that trauma can affect our life. Now, PTSD, many of you are familiar with how soldiers have PTSD, and believe it or not, 80% of soldiers do not have a form of PTSD. It is 20% that can have a high level of PTSD. When you're having soldiers that you work with, for example, making judgments on them that they automatically have PTSD is not always a good thing to do. By the way, when you're in your workplace and you have people that have been through trauma, they have fought battles and fought wars, some of those individuals are some of the best people that you want in your work. They have been through so much, so they have the strength and the adversity to get through challenges. And sometimes they could be some of the most creative thinkers as well. Now, PTSD, some people are fighting that fight for the rest of their life. What can you do in your work to help people with trauma? So if you can answer that in chat, that would be great. If you have people in your work that are dealing with some trauma, what is the best way that you're dealing with that in your workplace? We want actionable steps that you've taken to help people with some trauma. So we're looking here in chat for some of that. I do want to recommend too having what I call a virtual trauma suggestion box. In other words, you have a box maybe in the middle of the office that people can put slips of typed paper in on what suggestions that they need in order to help them with their trauma and also help them with their racial situations. In terms of the medical issues that people could be having at work as well, if you can put something in that trauma box to help say, look, I'm dealing with a condition of sleep apnea, so I'm tired a lot. Tell people that it's okay for them to make suggestions on what kind of change they may want in the workplace. One of you states, don't react to a behavior that might seem out of place. A lot of trauma reaction that happens with others, it is about emotional control. When sometimes people will just spill all the trauma that's going on in their life because it's boiled up and they need to let it out. So being there for them and being empathetic, part of emotional intelligence, topic I teach quite a bit about, is making sure that we control our emotions and really listen to the conversation from another person. What is that person saying that they're not saying? One of you states to remember there may be something behind that behavior that doesn't have anything to do with the actual moment. For example, if they're continually showing up late or they're missing deadlines, it could be an impact of financial trauma or some other trauma that's affecting their life in terms of social or emotional trauma. One of you says, listen fully to their experience, don't judge them. Make sure you listen thoroughly. One of the best books, one of you says, is called Forgiveness by Mark Somoto. Can we talk a little bit about when we say emotional and psychological impact, what that really means? Shock, disbelief, confusion. This is all happening with COVID. You know about this trauma. And when you're at home, being self-isolating, you're going through all of these types of emotions. Fear. One of the speakers in the past said that fear was false evidence appearing real. Fear is the anticipation of pain. And as humans, we know this for a fact that most of the things that we fear never really happen. So sometimes psychologically in trauma, we'll go to those worst case scenarios and we have to be careful with that, especially when you're in a work situation, to be able to separate, this is the job, I have to work, and then when I get home, I can deal with what I'm dealing with in terms of my mental or physical trauma needs. One of you said, don't sweep it under the rug. One of you said, when it comes to these feelings that we have here, can you give some examples? So I go into a situation at work and I'm really stressed about what's been going on in my life in terms of finances, in terms of my elderly mother being in a nursing home, of my kids and some of the things that are happening in their school. And it invokes emotions that cause me not to focus at work. So one of the best things you can do in terms of the feelings that you're having here at work is to do some journaling. Journaling and meditation is absolutely huge. As a psychologist, people are like, oh, you're suggesting meditation and journaling. That's so woo-woo. It works. And the studies tell us every time it does work. So getting in touch with your emotions is going to be very important to do in terms of what you're feeling in your emotions. So when you have a group of individuals that are experiencing some of the same type of events such as a COVID, having a COVID support group or a COVID call where once a week you're on the phone talking about how COVID has impacted your life and letting people express that. A lot of us are self-isolated at home and don't have that expression. If you are a manager, make sure you're checking on your employees, making sure they're doing okay during this time of stress. We all have triggers that set this stress off. We all have things that cause us to feel what I call a hot button. When something happens, we press, something happens outside, we press that hot button inside of us and it triggers reliving that trauma over and over again. One of you states, we check in at the start of every meeting with one another before we start, giving folks the chance to be aware of any social, emotional barriers that may hold us back in the moment. There's nothing like having a meeting and say, well, how's everybody feeling today? And really tell us. When you're having a meeting, have everybody go around and state what they're feeling about the current environment. When you're dealing with a racial situation, I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're dealing with so much racial tension here. This racial tension it's been a perfect storm. You have COVID, you have racial tension, and as a result, people are going out and expressing how they're feeling about the situation. They're going online and expressing it. So as employers, what are we doing to help people let that out? So tell me a little bit about that in chat. What are some of the activities that you do at your work that you support your workers in expressing what's going on for them mentally? Do you have those meetings where people are expressing? Do you have a conference call where you're bringing someone in? I'm just a big fan of training and talking about a particular aspect of COVID, or how to be more resilient, or how to be more positive in this day and age. So talk to me in chat about what you're doing in that. And you have to set healthy boundaries too. When we have boundaries that are crossed by certain individuals, that can really bring out trauma. When someone says the wrong word at the wrong time and it just triggers that trauma. We, in some ways, give power to the negative situations that are in our life. At the same time, we give power to ourselves to get past some of those negative situations. Staying positive is absolutely going to be key during a time of trauma. One of you says we have an EAP phone line. Excellent. We need to focus on work and do one-on-one. So someone gets support, it's there. What else are you doing at your work in order to help people if they're needing to express their voice about what they're going through in this day and age? And by the way, we know this for a fact. We spend more time at work than we do at home. So when we're at work, those thoughts can creep in of all the things that we have to deal with when we get off work. You want strong employees, and we all want to make sure that our businesses are successful. So having a staff and hiring for people that are diverse and have strong resilience can be very important. In the interview process, when you're interviewing them and you ask them about how they dealt with COVID and how they dealt with stress in their life, can be very powerful to kind of determine the resilience ability. There is a psychological stimulus that prompts our recall of a traumatic event. A soldier, for example, could be watching TV and all of a sudden he changes the channel, or she changes the channel and sees something about war that can trigger that effect. So when we experience that trigger, we have to figure out, first of all, why that trigger happened to us and what can we do to make sure that we don't react in such a negative way in the future. And at work, one of you is saying that you provide a safe place for them to talk about their feeling. You allow people to come together for an hour to voice their concerns, their feelings of trauma, etc. So we have paired associations that happen with trauma events. For example, a soldier was in battle, and then they have a trauma of that battle situation. You have me that experienced something in a case, or has the word KKK, and have a paired association. So sometimes we have to look at some of the paired associations and determine the reality of the situation. The fact is, a soldier is not currently in the battle, and currently right now I'm not being affected by the KKK. So we have to be realistic on what's going on in terms of our trauma and how it's occurring. Now, I did want to share with you, when I looked up the term PTSD, look at some videos on YouTube. Did you know that on YouTube, they have millions of views on rap songs as opposed to getting help for PTSD? So many people who have PTSD are almost ashamed to admit it to other people because they're afraid they'll be put in boxed or judged. Same with some of the trauma that exists in some of your employees. They feel like if they tell you that you will put them in a box and they'll be judged. And when they're in that box, they're not feeling the highest self-esteem. We know that PTSD itself can be a dual diagnosis where you're not only dealing with PTSD, but also depression. So depression itself is happening because of a trigger. So when you're feeling your employee's emotional state, and the best way to do that is to have an open listening that you do. And when you listen, I want you to practice I call it 3D listening, when you're listening with your heart, your head, and your spirit. What is that person saying that they're not really saying? That way you can really tell if something is really going on. And how many of you, when someone comes in the morning and you say good morning, you really mean it? Sometimes you just say good morning, you don't really mean it. And when you really mean it, or you're really saying, how you doing today? And you're really breaking that state. Sometimes people need to talk to others at work. And you want to be the employer that is there to help your employees through some of the tough times, especially with all of the things that are going on in this day and age. And then we start studying as employers, companies that have been successful at dealing with some of the negative that has happened. We know there's been situations like Starbucks and Papa John's. There have been racial situations that happen in companies that have triggered trauma in employees, and we have to study how we're getting past that and how we're going to fix what's going on with a trauma situation. So setting healthy boundaries, what we mean by that is that you actually want to remove yourself from the situations. There have been people, for example, that have had the storm take their houses, and living in that same community just helped them keep thinking about that situation over and over again. So sometimes it is about removing yourself to that situation, even the concept of moving to a different environment in order to not have that stimulus over and over being interacted. By the way, one of you said 3D listen, what is it? And when you think of a 3D movie, it's kind of right in your face. It's the same concept with 3D listening. You're listening with your heart, your head, and your spirit. There is a simple formula that we're dealing with in terms of trauma. E plus R equals O. An event plus a response determines an outcome. So negative event, negative response, negative outcome. Negative event, positive response, positive outcome. So E plus R equals O is something you want to think about in terms of the events that are happening in your community, in terms of your workers, as well as what's happening in the world. If you sat at home and think about all the trauma events that were going on right now in this world, it would be overwhelming. So that's what we talk about, having healthy boundaries. Now, I'm not making fun of the station at all, CNN, constant negative news. No, I'm just kidding. I love the station, or any Fox News, whatever the station is for you. I'm not able to watch that anymore. I have to have healthy boundaries to avoid that negative so I don't keep reliving that trauma. So it is about putting limits, and it's about tuning into your feelings. One of the best ways to do that is to take time with you and do the self-work, the self-care that we're going to talk about towards the end of this webinar today. And I'm curious right now, what type of boundaries are you doing in your life to protect you from some of the negative that's going on out there? So everybody go ahead and put some things in chat real quick. What are some of the things you're doing to make sure you have healthy boundaries in terms of some of the negative situations that are going on right now? One of you said news channels look for ratings, not facts. It's exhausting to follow the news. Wouldn't it be great if we had another station called PNN, the Positive News Network, where we're watching the positive rather than the negatives? One of you says that you're watching comedies instead of the news. One of you is looking at BBC more than the US news. You'll want to do a search in the future, by the way, of some of the countries that don't have as much trauma in their work or in their culture. In our work, we have to limit what kind of stressors that we bring to our workers that could possibly cause trauma. If I'm a manager and I keep giving employees work and they don't say no, they're going to drop the ball on something. So we have to talk with our employees to make sure they're able to handle our workload so it doesn't bring future trauma to them. One of you says, looking forward to when ABC rolls out it permanently. One of you saying, enjoying and charitable work has helped me focus on making the world better rather than focusing on what's wrong. And one of you says, shutting off social media after work. I spend all day sorting through social media for positive messages, facts, and taking time away from this is so important. And then avoiding negative people, avoiding people who are too over the top, whether I agree with them or not. Sometimes we are the sum total of who we hang around with, and negative. If we have boundaries of negative people and saying to a negative person, I don't want to talk about this subject, that's a healthy boundary. And when we look at this material that I'm presenting today, you always want to think, what would your healthy voice say? What would your positive voice say? One of you states, look for different views, watch more positive shows on politics, watch more positive shows versus politics, and watch more nature shows and music. And with setting healthy boundaries, you have to give yourself permission to do the things that's going to make you more healthy. One of you says taking a self-imposed break from social media. And it's almost like we have a global pandemic and we also almost have a racial pandemic in this country. So with the things you think to yourself, that makes a difference on the impact of trauma as well. So we use affirmations to make sure that we're saying positive messages to ourselves. I will get through this. I will not let this trauma win. And staying strong through that trauma event. So what ways can we avoid re-traumatizing in our workplace? Can you give me some ideas in chat? We don't want to re-traumatize people again, so give me some thoughts about how to make sure we're avoiding re-traumatization. Okay, one of you is saying here, one of the things that you do is that you go for walks, that you're exercising. If you are experiencing a trauma event in your mind, and you go exercise, you're not going to come out with the same stress level as when you began the exercise. If you do a good 45-minute workout. So when we're thinking about the concept of what this webinar is about, self-care through trauma, taking care of yourself is so important. And it's at many different levels. You have your mental body, you have your physical body, you have an emotional body, in some cases your spiritual body. So taking care of those needs are critical. If you think about employers who are giving employees tasks and not thinking about their self-care, it's a different situation as opposed to giving them tasks and thinking about their self-care. Giving them the tools and the abilities to be able to be more powerful in taking care of their self. So how are you teaching self-care at work? So how are you teaching self-care work? I know in chat I'm giving you a lot to think about, and I think it's important we think about these things and think about solutions that we can take with us. One of you says that you challenge negative thoughts with positive affirmations. One of you says you do a silent prayer. You have alone time and you let your mind go blank. Using vacations, you'll be surprised at the statistics of how many Americans are not using their vacation time. I think is an important part of self-care. Minimize the stress. You exercise and you listen to gospel music, one of you saying. You take a walk away from your computer. I'm asked in my seminars all the time, how many of you take lunch? And many people don't even raise their hand. So when we get back into our work routine, taking that self-care break where you're doing the work to take a walk and get some fresh air, to recharge and get into the power that you have inside to deal with whatever trauma that you're dealing with. One of you has shortened your workday. One of you states, as an essential organization, we did not shut down because of COVID. We front-loaded PTO and allowed folks to use the PTO that's needed. So we have to be creative as businesses in order to help people with their self-care. We have to recognize their performance when they do a great job. We have to acknowledge that the task was tough and they were able to do it. And that builds our employees up so they're much stronger in dealing with things that happen in their environmental trauma. And one of you says, don't take life so seriously. When we take life seriously, people can see it, they can feel it. You all know that stressed coworker coming to work, they got something going on, you don't know what it is, and you kind of stay away from them. So with a change in our environment, with COVID and some of the racial situations that are happening, we have to think about what we can do in order to make sure that we're proactive in dealing with the self-care of the people in our work environment. So when you think about the years that have happened in the African American's journey, 400 years of different racial situations that have happened, imagine changing the level of self-care based on our history. We can learn from those that have rised above some of the racial situations they dealt with and some of the environmental situations they dealt with. We have dealt with pandemics before. We have dealt with trauma before as a people, and we've gotten through it. So tell me some of the resilient people that you have known, some celebrities that you have known that have been resilient through a lot of stressful times. We look at a situation, for example, like Gandhi, who has had a discriminatory situation, and as a result, he did a nonviolent protest and invoked people with emotion, and change happened. What kind of change can we make in a workplace if we all acted like the Gandhis of the world and the Martin Luther Kings of the world and the Mother Teresas of the world, where we're doing what we can to recognize there is a need with our workers in terms of self-care, and that some of our workers have experienced trauma, and we want to be there and help them. Being a manager through a time like this is going to be very stressing for you as well, and it's important that you take care of your self-care too, where you don't ignore it. Some people are all about others and rather than taking care of themselves. So as we go throughout this journey of self-care, what can you do every day to improve your level of self-care? So let's talk about that in chat. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis to improve your self-care? Okay, one of you saying, I'm not taking life too seriously. What else? Okay, run with your friends before work. Go to bed at a decent time. Okay. Now, I do think it's important for us to think about when we're in our community as an employer, what kind of goals do we want to have with our employees? Do we not want our employees to be healthy? Do we want them to achieve the maximum they can? Well, self-care is a part of doing that. One of you says, I never used to take a lunch. Now I go for a walk and I get fresh air during my lunch break and spend more time and quality with my family. One of you do meditation, biking. There's another formula you want to be aware of as well in terms of your self-care. Your attitude plus your behavior is going to determine your consequences. So positive attitude, positive behavior, positive consequences. A very simple formula to remember. A plus B equals C. write down all the things in your life that make you feel powerful. So when a trauma event happens, it could be a COVID. To be honest with you, and we're being as candid as possible here, we don't know if there's going to be another COVID in the future. We don't know if there's going to be another racial situation in the future. The key is that we do something proactively to be prepared. We know that one consistent thing in life is change. And as much as we're ready for change, the better we'll be able to deal with it. So with closing this self-care model, with closing the situation about a racial situation, it is up to us, and it's up to our thought process about how we are going to help people that are experiencing trauma in this day and age, and the drama that goes along with the trauma, and how we can work on the self-care ourselves. You are important. The work you're doing is important. And we want to make sure that employees feel that and know that. One of you is asking, could you repeat A plus B equals C? And A plus B equals C means attitude plus behavior determines your consequences. Your attitude plus your behavior determines your consequences. Now, looking at some of the, I'm going to turn over here to Marsha in another 2 or 3 minutes. And watching the previous webinars, one of the things that's so important about the work we're doing here is to have action steps that we can take right away. And one of the best action steps you can do right now is to have a habit of self-care, a habit of checking your attitude and your thoughts and your process, and your attitude of giving your workers the best possibly help they can in terms of their self-care and helping them be empowered in the workplace. Marsha? I can't hear you.
Here I go.
Yeah, there you are.
Yay.
Yay.
I was just saying, this is a fabulous webinar, and I personally think I needed a little attitude adjustment to help me get that new habit. And I loved what you said at the beginning. You know, it's important we all do the work, that we're not just the talk, we're all the work. And I want to say I see many familiar names and people that I know and people from around the state on these webinars week after week, and you are all doing the work, and you are all going to make a difference, and you're all going to help the employees of New York get through this trauma with some of the tools that we learned today and from the other webinars that we are all experiencing. So thank you for giving some of those great tips, for telling us to set the boundary, for talking to us about interview processes in the future and how that shows the resilience of employees. By having the attitude that I'm going to get through this, that this trauma is not going to get me. I'm going to stay on top of this. And that the event plus our own reactions to the event really has to do with the outcome that we all experience. And I want to thank all the participants for sharing as well, because I've learned a lot from you. You've all learned a lot from each other. And so, Dr. Mel, thank you so much for sharing this. As you see, I was busy taking notes. I hope everyone else was. We're taking a break until September. So we hope you'll all mark your calendars for September 1st when our next webinar is, and I believe the next one is September 8th. And I do want to especially thank Balancing Life's Issues, and especially Wendy Wallner, their CEO, who's done such a great job in bringing us all these great speakers. And our event partners, the Business Council of New York State, Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, New York State Economic Development Council, the Westchester Putnam Workforce Development Board, and the Putnam County Business Council. Remember, if you want to share these, they are on the Business Council of Westchester's website at thebcw.org, as well as many other great resources in our anti-racism educational center. So Dr. Mel, thank you. Bravo. You did a great job. And for the rest of August, the rest of the summer, everyone stay healthy and stay safe and wear a mask. Have a great day. Enjoy.